West. The Russian turnout in particular was impressive. In the Soviet Union, journalists are part of the political structure, and the main participants from Moscow doubled as unofficial advisors to Mr. Gorbachev himself. As the session paused for a coffee break, I found that none of the Russians seemed optimistic about the prospects for a summit in the wake of the unsuccessful meeting in Moscow last Friday. There were suggestions that Mr. Gorbachev had felt that he'd made too many concessions to the American side and now wanted the Americans to make a concession.
Maybe you have right. We will do our best to achieve agreement with this administration. And we are ready to achieve agreement with this administration. It is to Americans to decide.
The extraordinary lumbering figure of Alexander Bovin, arguably the most gifted journalist in the Soviet Union and an advisor to successive Kremlin leaders, was more specific.
Примерно шансы 60 на 40.
The chances are now, in my estimate, 60 to 40 in favor of the summit.
It wasn't just the receding summit which depressed the Russian delegates, it was something more general. The man they support, and whose success or failure will affect their own careers, is running into serious difficulties in Moscow. The opposition comes mostly from people whose position is threatened by Mr. Gorbachev's economic reforms. It surfaced strongly last Monday in the Supreme Soviet, the equivalent of Parliament, when the head of the old-style anti-reformist state planning organization announced his forecasts for next year. It was just the kind of thing that Mr. Gorbachev has pledged himself to get rid of. Impossible targets for growth and output that everyone knows can't genuinely be achieved. Mr. Gorbachev was absent from his seat during much of the speech, and journalists were told it was because of a crisis in the Gulf. Now, however, Western diplomats believe Mr. Gorbachev walked out because he was infuriated by this show of opposition. At the meeting in Budapest, Alexander Bovin was frank about the obstacles to reform.
This process is meeting obstacles subjectively and objectively. Perhaps they are bigger than we thought. It is a very hard and difficult job, but we are sure we will be able to carry it out to the end.
The Soviet delegates came to the Budapest conference in Mr. Gorbachev's new spirit of glasnost, or openness. Now they're having to be open about the bad news as well as the good. This is John Simpson for the 6 o'clock news in Budapest.
Later in the programme, the doctors who want a smoke-free society. Could these be the last of the big smokers? Launched today to try to persuade smokers to give it up. The doctors' organisation, the British Medical Association, is aiming the message at young smokers. Its ambition is to create a smoke-free generation by the year 2000. A report from James Wilkinson.
Smoking is a declining habit. Only about a third of adults now smoke. But while adults are heeding the health message, many children, especially girls, are not. Now the British Medical Association wants to recruit parents to help prevent children taking up the habit. At a news conference this morning, experts stressed that some children have their first cigarette when they're as young as 4. And by the time they're 12, many children are regular smokers. But the latest figures on children's smoking habits are encouraging. In 1984, 13% of boys and girls between 11 and 16 were regular smokers. By 1986, only 7% of boys of this age group...
The atmosphere of